We have been in a teaching series here at Monterey Church called Courage to Flourish. We've been in the book of Joshua exploring a story that shows us about how the plans and promises of God are fulfilled, even when they seem bigger than we are. This book shows us what it looks like to follow God with courage and faith and trust, even in the midst of significant challenges. And so today, as we come to the end of this story, what we've seen all throughout is that even in the midst of our brokenness, the sinfulness in our lives, the times when we go astray from following God, what we have seen in this book time and time again is how God is gracious and He fulfills His promises. We can experience this most deeply through Jesus when we turn towards Him for mercy and healing. But what we also see in this story is that God cares about our needs in this life, and not one of His promises is forgotten. We saw this last week in the display of God leading His people to the promised land as God gave them this home, this inheritance that He'd made as a promise to Abraham generations earlier. And so today, as we come to the end of this story, we're in the final chapter of the book of Joshua, and our message today is titled, "Your Greatest Legacy is What You Worship." Okay, your greatest legacy is what you worship. And again, I want to give us a mental picture. I want you to envision a boat cutting through the water, and how even after a boat passes by, a wake ripples out behind it, spreading far and wide. In a similar way, each of us, we leave a legacy. This is the wake behind us, a trail of stories and values and influence. This is our legacy, and it often outlives us. And so what we're going to see today is our legacy is formed most deeply, not by what we accrue or what we leave behind in terms of material wealth or accomplishment, but our greatest legacy is what is at the center of our hearts. And this not only will lead us to flourish in our own lives when we set God at the center, but it will transform the generations that follow after us. I want to give you an example of this. Listen to this, a striking example of how our own faithfulness to God and following Him can transform those who follow after us. Comes from a man named Jonathan Edwards. This guy was a church leader and an author back at the time of the American Revolution. And Jonathan Edwards, his life was marked by a deep devotion to Jesus. And this was carried on in the way that he practiced his life personally, but also in the way that he led his family. He and his wife had 11 children. And so some may say Jonathan Edwards must have really liked children. Others would say Jonathan Edwards must have really liked his wife. Either way, 11 children. But over a century after Jonathan Edwards died, a study was done on the legacy he left behind. Listen to this. A journalist named A.E. Winship looked over 1,400 of Jonathan Edwards' descendants. And so they traced 1,400 members of his family, his children's children, and their children, and their children, so on, 100 years after he passed away. And this is the pattern of impact. Listen to this. Of those descendants, there were 13 college presidents, 65 professors, 130 lawyers. Some may say, I don't know if that's a good legacy or a bad legacy. There were also 66 physicians and 80 holders of public office, including 2 senators and a U.S. vice president. Man, I want to be clear. This legacy is about much more than a tradition of professional success. Okay? What we see here is that these numbers, they tell a deeper story. They show us how Jonathan Edwards, even though he left behind little in terms of material wealth, a legacy of godliness, character, and his personal integrity, this legacy of what was inside of him, this is something that he passed on, a heart to make a difference for God and for others. This was passed on in the vision that his life gave to those who followed after him of what it looks like to be a person who's about something bigger than yourself. And so this moved those members of his family to dedicate themselves to serving God and others 100 years after Jonathan Edwards had passed away. And so, my friends, this story, it shows us our greatest legacy will not merely be in material wealth that we pass along. It won't even be in our accomplishment. It's not in what we possess. It's not in what we achieve, but what is at the center of our hearts and how that transforms the way that you and I live. And this is the lesson that Joshua was determined to pass on to the people of Israel. and his last words with them as their leader. And this is what we're going to study today. And so to give you a little bit of our setting, this event that we're focused on today, it takes place 20 or 25 years after the passage we looked at last week, this story of Joshua dividing up the land among the different tribes of Israel. So at this point in time, at the end of Joshua's life, he's 110 years old, all right? Which tells us that the land of Canaan was probably the original blue zone, if you're into that. 110 years old. Even still, Joshua, he's 110 years old. His finish line is coming into sight, but he has some real passion. He has a driving desire to communicate to the next generation what is most important. So he's gathered Israel's leaders, listen to this, as well as their leaders, as many members of that nation as who could make it to a city called Shechem, where he wants to deliver a final speech. So Joshua's finish line is in sight, and he wants to make his last moments count. And here's the scene. I want you to envision this. The city of Shechem, it was located between two mountains. It was in a valley in the hill country of Israel. And those two mountains along either side of it were called Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And this location was strategic. Jonathan chose this setting for a reason. And that's because Shechem was a sacred place for the people of Israel. It was a place rich with meaning and history. It was at this very site 600 years earlier when God told Abraham, I will give your offspring this land. I will make you into a great nation. He told him, I will bless you. I will make you into a great nation, and you will be a blessing. And so it was in this place that Abraham, he built an altar to worship God, marking this location as a place of God's promise. That's the history of this spot. And then later on in the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, God, he pointed once again to those two mountains here at Shechem, along either side of where the nations gathered. And this was a setting that God declared as significant in reminding his people of his love for them. He told them to pronounce the blessings that came with faithfulness to God's covenant from the top of one mountain, and then the curses that would come with disobedience, failing to obey, from the other. And so this is a city that was rooted in Israel's past as a significant location for decisive spiritual moments. Okay? That's why Joshua has gathered his people here for his final message to them. This is a spiritually decisive moment for the people of Israel. And so this scene, it kind of reminds me of a commercial that those of you who are college basketball fans will remember seeing each year during March Madness. They seem to play this on repeat for about the past 5 years. It's a commercial of Jimmy V for the Jimmy V Foundation, a cancer research group, where at the end of his life, the famous basketball coach who won a national championship, Jim Valvano, he was giving a speech on what he wanted to pass along to the next generation as he was sick with cancer. The lessons he wanted to share from his championship coaching career as well as his fight with that disease. He told people, don't give up. Don't ever give up. So today's story, this is that kind of moment for Joshua. And so what we're going to see is that he doesn't just offer a history lesson. What Joshua has to offer the people of Israel and what he has to offer you and I is a heartfelt challenge. And so as we listen in, there are two timeless truths that we're going to see rise to the top, two key reminders for you and I that will inform the legacy that we leave behind in our own lives. And so here's the first. It's that blessing follows wholehearted devotion to God. That's our first reminder. And we see this in Joshua chapter 23. In this section of the story, Joshua is speaking specifically with the leaders of Israel. And so what he does is he leads them to reflect on the story of their past. He reminds them of how far they've come and how God has been faithful throughout their journey. And so he tells them the Lord has fought for you. He's given you victory. He's fulfilled his promise. And so what we see, this is what has happened as God's people have trusted him and been obedient to his word. Joshua encourages them, continue in this direction, and God's blessing is going to continue for you. And so this is how Joshua begins, but he doesn't stop there. He also provides a sobering warning. I want to read this for you. Look at verse 16 here in Joshua chapter 23. This is what he says. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you. Will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. Now, these are some very intense words. They may seem a bit distant and ancient to us, words like covenant and idolatry and judgment, but the heart of what Joshua is saying here has not changed. And these threats that he's ultimately warning against, they're very much a danger to you and I today in our own flourishing in our relationship with God, because what Joshua is ultimately talking about are the threats of misplaced trust and misdirected worship. And so it's helpful for us to remember, for Israel, their temptation to worship idols, this wasn't ultimately about golden statues. There was something behind it. It was about the pull on their hearts to become like the nations around them. It was about this draw to chase after things like satisfaction and success and wealth and things that promise to meet their needs apart from God. And so this is where today's teaching begins to get personal for us. It's because even though you and I, we might not bow down to physical idols, to carved images, we still face this temptation towards idolatry, to trust in something other than God, to give us a sense of fulfillment or provision that only God can ultimately provide. You see, that's what idolatry is ultimately about. Idolatry is about looking to something other than God for what God himself alone is able to provide. And so what's true is idols, they're not always something bad. They can often be good things like career or relationship or appearance, achievement, or wealth. These are good things when held in the right perspective, but they can become idols when we hope in them to deliver a satisfaction, a peace, or sense of identity, or being enough that ultimately is only found in God. And so this reminds me of a movie you may have seen. It's a musical that came out a few years ago, The Greatest Showman. And the story, it tells the path of a man named P.T. Barnum, who sought to build an entertainment industry enterprise where he could make a name for himself through his own achievement of success. His longing for approval and applause is something that drives him throughout this film. But the problem is, the more that P.T. Barnum desires success and achievement through building an entertainment empire, the more he realizes that that will never give him the sense of fulfillment he ultimately has hoped for. And so one of the songs that his character in this movie sings, it captures this perfectly. He sings, "All the shine of 1,000 spotlights, all the stars we steal from the night sky will never be enough." He sings, "Towers of gold are still too little. These hands could hold the world, but it'll never be enough. It'll never be enough for me." And those of you who've seen this movie, you know those words are beautiful, and so is the music. And there's an element in which you hear that and you feel inspired by that human drive for excellence. But what's true is that there's also an element of sadness in that song. There's sadness in it, in that insatiable desire that our idols create. It's never enough when we seek satisfaction in them that only God is ultimately able to provide. And many of us, we know what that feels like. We know what it feels like to chase after things like spotlight and status, salary and success, and find them falling short. When we put them at the center of our own hopes, they'll never be enough, because the applause, it inevitably fades. Our wealth, it inevitably goes to someone else. Beauty, it always breaks down. But the good news is, God does not leave us in a cycle of hoping for fulfillment in places that fail to deliver. He offers us a pathway to true satisfaction through his Son, Jesus. Because the Christian hope, it's not about earning God's love, but about responding to the love he's already shown us through sending his own Son. The hope of the Christian faith is that Jesus came and lived a perfect life that you and I could never live. In our own sinfulness, you and I could never live a perfect life, but Jesus came and did that on our behalf, and he laid it down on the cross to make a way for us to be restored to God forever. that we could be forgiven of our sins and declared right with him once and for all, that we could share in his resurrection life and be secure in relationship with our Heavenly Father who made us, who loves us. This is the Christian faith. And so just like Joshua in today's story, just like he wanted to see the nation of Israel free of idols, Jesus desires for us to be set free from all of those things that would hold us back from the fullness of life he has made us for. Jesus, he tells us, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never thirst again. And so, my friends, when we set our hearts on this truth, it changes us that we can begin to live for the things that matter most. We can begin to live with humility and find freedom from that endless cycle of hoping and idols. This is when we find true peace. It's hoping in Jesus that gives us rest from living in fear and striving as our hearts are grounded in the truth that we can't gain God's favor any more than we already have it. Our greatest blessings are already secured through Jesus, and those things can never be lost. And so I want to ask you, as you think about your own journey, where in your life have you been searching for something that only God is ultimately able to give? Where have you been searching to idols provide what only God is ultimately able to give? And what would it look like for you to return to him? What would it look like for you to find satisfaction in Jesus alone? I hope that you'll give that some thought right now and throughout today. What is true for each of us is that identifying our idols and choosing to relax our grip on those things that we've often felt we need to be satisfied as people, it is scary. It's very scary, but when we do, it comes with the reward of finding true satisfaction and security. And that is well worth the cost. And so as we continue on, the next reminder that Joshua gives us in this last part of his story is that our worship shapes our legacy. Okay, our second reminder is your worship shapes your legacy. So choose today who you will serve. This is what Joshua tells the people of Israel. And so we see this in chapter 24. In this section, Joshua is speaking to the entire nation of Israel, the people who are gathered. And this is a covenant renewal ceremony. And so again, what Joshua does is he recounts the story of all that God has done for the people of Israel. He traces back over their path. And first of all, Joshua probably does this because it was important for them to hear. And second, Joshua probably does this because he's super old. And we all know sometimes old people like to repeat the same stories. But we've got to let that happen, right? And so Joshua, he recounts this whole story. He tells them how God was faithful, God was powerful. He never failed up to show up with his mercy. And so here's what he tells them. He says, God gave you a land that you didn't work for. He gave you cities you didn't build, and you live in them. You eat fruit from them that you didn't even plant. And then with all of this in view, here's Joshua's challenge to the people of Israel to double down on setting God at the center of their hearts. This is verses 14 and 15. He tells them, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the idols of your ancestors that you worship beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors that they served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But I love this. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Those are well-known words where Joshua calls this generation of Israelites to make a decision once and for all, to pursue God with total commitment. And so the call of this passage to you and I, it is the same. It's a question that you and I are presented with here today. Who are we going to serve? And what this reminds us is this book, it's not given to us just for the sake of a history lesson. This book is meant to change our hearts as the Holy Spirit speaks to us through it. And so the end of this story, what this does is it challenges us because we have a temptation that we can cling to comfort. or we can step into God's calling. This is what we're presented with. We can return to the idols of our past, or we can follow the God who holds our future. That's the challenge that God is giving to us here through the story of Joshua. This reminds me of the story of the Spanish explorer Hernan Cortez, who, in leading his troops to go and venture into the land that is now Mexico to explore with a sense of adventure, he told them, we're burning the ships, we're moving forward. This is how he cast a vision to lead them into these new horizons without any desire to turn back. God calls each and every one of us who have experienced his grace to follow him into a new way of life with total commitment. And I love the way that the Apostle Paul frames up what this can look like for you and I in his letter to the Corinthians. He says this: Christ's love compels us. This is how Jesus changes us. He tells us Christ's love compels us because we're convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. This is the vision that he offers you and I through the grace of Jesus. Do you see it? That when we know Jesus, our lives, they're no longer our own. And so what Paul tells us is that God's grace, it demands a decision from us. There's no room for half-heartedness. We're either all in and following him with our lives, we're missing out on the fullness that God has for us. It's on you and I to decide. And at the end of the day, what's true for each and every one of us is that all of us, we build our lives on something. We all make that choice. Some of us choose to build our lives on things like power or approval from others or on pleasure. And what is true is whatever we worship, it has a way of shaping us. And not everything that we worship leads to life. Some of you will be familiar with the author David Foster Wallace, but he was speaking at a college commencement ceremony a number of years ago, and he shared some powerful words related to this idea about how what we set at the center of our hearts has a way of shaping us that will determine our lives, the quality of our lives. Here's what he said. He said, there's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. Keep in mind, this man was an agnostic. Didn't have any faith. There's no such thing as not worshiping. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, then you will never have enough. You'll never feel you have enough. It's the truth. If you worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. That's our inspirational quote for the morning. And so we're all faced with that question. Who are we going to serve? The one true God who's able to satisfy that desire inside of us. Are we going to serve our idols? And what is true is there is no more important question that you and I can answer that will determine our own flourishing in life. And it will also shape the legacy we leave behind for those who follow after us. Who will you serve? Now, to bring this full circle, we began today's teaching with that story of Jonathan Edwards, that leader in the church around the time of the American Revolution, and the way that he established a legacy of commitment to Christ and how that impacted the generations that followed after him. Something we need to know is that Jonathan Edwards valued structure in his relationship with God, and he put structure in place to help him live out the kind of purposes that really mattered most. And so he had 70 resolutions that he read to himself weekly. 70 resolutions for the way that he wanted to live, that he reminded himself of, that he could follow Jesus every day with God's help. And so listen to this. Here are just the first two of those resolutions. Resolution 1 for Jonathan Edwards was, I will live for God. That's resolution number 1. And do you know resolution number 2? If no one else does, I still will. And that's what picture of what total commitment looks like. That's what it looks like to serve God with total commitment. I will live for God. If no one else does, I still will. And Monterey Church, at the end of the day, each and every one of us, we are going to leave behind a legacy. And there are some who are well known whose last words, they reflect a lack of greater hope and the things that they live for. You'll know some of these names. The philosopher Sigmund Freud, as he was sick and dying of cancer, and he actually passed away through euthanasia, his last words were, "This is absurd. This is absurd." And Queen Elizabeth I of England, back in the 16th century, she was one of the most wealthy and powerful rulers of her day, and her own last words as she came to the end of her life, they're recorded as this. She said, "I'd give all of my possessions, but for one more moment in time." But what do we see in Joshua's last words, this man of faith? They point us to where life is truly found. "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua's last words, they remind us that blessing follows wholehearted devotion to God. And your worship, it shapes your legacy. So choose today who you will serve. As we close, I want to share with you one final example of someone whose life provides a dramatic display of total commitment to Christ. And it's a woman named Sophie Scholl. She was a university student at the time of World War II in Munich, Germany. And she became involved with the non-violent anti-Nazi movement on her college campus. She was a strong she was a strong Christian, so she also felt a moral conviction to oppose what she saw happening in her nation. And so she worked with a small team of fellow students distributing leaflets throughout their college campus, exposing the atrocities that were taking place under Hitler's leadership against the Jewish people and calling people to wake up to the truth. And so Sophie Scholl, she was committed to this, and she was eventually caught and arrested. And she was given a sham trial and sentenced to death just the next day after she was arrested. But as she came to her final moments, she felt very strongly that she had done the right thing according to her Christian faith. And so her last words were, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause?" And she said, "What does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" That's the kind of boldness that this young woman displayed as a leader. She stood firm in her commitment to Christ no matter the cost. And for that, she's enjoying eternal rewards with her Heavenly Father, things that will never fade. And her story, it provides an inspiring example of what faithfulness to Jesus looks like all around the world and across generations. Guys, this is the kind of legacy that we want to leave behind for those who will follow after us, that they too would know the truth and live in a way that reflects where life and hope are ultimately found. And we can do this by choosing to put Jesus first in ways both big and small. That story of Sophie Scholl is dramatic, but we can choose to put Christ first and building a legacy ourselves in everyday, ordinary ways. This could be as small as making a commitment that you're going to pray with those in your house each and every day, that you're going to pray for them. Maybe it's making a commitment to pray for friends or family outside of your home on a regular basis and even letting them know it. Or maybe it's inviting someone you sense God calling you to invest in to join you for weekly worship and then go to lunch afterwards. You and I can make this impact. We can build a legacy ourselves by investing in the faith journey of others, one day at a time, because at the end of our own days, what we want to leave behind is a wake that shows not just what we've built or accrued, but who we have worshiped at the center of our hearts. So let's be a people who worship Jesus first with our own words and our attitudes and our actions in every area of our lives, not to earn God's love, but because we already have it through Jesus. Jesus gave everything for us. And so let's give our whole lives back to him. I'm going to pray for us in just a moment, and then we'll respond in worship. But first, I want to share one exciting announcement. As we conclude our series in Joshua, next week we have a real treat. We're welcoming some friends from Set Free Monterey Bay, which if you've been around our church for a while. This is a local ministry that is doing some incredible work to bring hope and healing to survivors of sex trafficking right here in our community. And so if you've been around for a while, you've heard us share about their impact. And next Sunday, you'll get to hear from them directly as Amber Van Hoos, their director of operations, is going to share. She's going to preach and also give us some stories of impact from the work that they're up to here in our city. Ashley Chesney, their executive director, will also be here. She'll be in the lobby to answer questions, to share about their ministry, and let us all know different ways that we can be involved. And next Sunday, we're also going to kick off a brand new teaching series called From the Depths, from the book of Psalms. And I believe we have a quick video to show you what that's all about.
What do you do when life gets dark, feels confusing or overwhelming?
This summer at Monterey Church, we're diving into the Psalms, which is a collection of writings in the Bible that are raw, honest interactions with God from the depths of the soul.
Whether you're feeling unseen, overwhelmed, or just needing direction, these ancient words still speak powerfully to us today.
Join us and discover a hope that rises from the depths. Sundays at 10 a.m. in the Golden State Theater in downtown Monterey. See you there.